Welcome to the second lecture. This lecture is going to be on determining evidence-based practices and how to do so. Um, Evidence-based practices as part of No Child Left Behind and IDEA are now required to be used in classrooms. One of the things that we're also finding in the field of autism that as people are looking for a cure, um, there's been a lot of untested, ineffectual, and sometimes harmful intervention strategies. And so it's important to understand whether or not an intervention does have an evidence base and to be able to know how to determine whether or not it does have a strong evidence base. So CEC actually established criteria for developing evidence-based practices, and we're going to talk about what those are. First, a practice is a curriculum, behavioral intervention, systems change, or educational approach that's designed for use by families, educators, or students with the express expectation that implementation will result in measurable educational, social, behavioral, or physical benefit. So what you're doing in your classrooms, many of those things are practices, particularly the interventions you use, or what you're doing in homes or with therapy. And it's important to know if what you're doing does have a strong evidence base, is safe, is effective. A practice can be an intervention, a procedure for documenting a controlling mechanism, or even a large program with multiple components, for example, direct instruction. Some of the research methodologies that you see in special education are single subject, which is the one with the graphs, experimental or quasi-experimental groups. You'll see those with statistics. Qualitative research is where you're telling kind of stories and you're finding commonalities among them, and correlational, where you're doing some statistical analysis looking at correlations. We're going to talk about single subject and experimental because those are the two research methodologies that are most often used to determine whether a practice is evidence-based in the field of special education. Single subject design can be used to establish evidence-based practices. Those are the ones that you're graphing behavior change, and it's usually done with a smaller number of subjects, anywhere from 1, sometimes 5, maybe even as many as 10, although usually it's done somewhere between 1 and 5 subjects. It involves 1 or more participants. The dependent variables, which are the target behaviors, the behavior you're trying to change, are observable and measurable. The independent variables, which are the interventions or the treatments that you're applying, are very specifically described so that you know that you can see that what is being manipulated there, and you can determine whether or not it is the intervention that has caused any behavioral change, as opposed to something else happening in the environment or with the individual or individuals. Experimental control is established through a number of different strategies, reversal withdrawal designs, the ABAB design, multiple baseline designs across behavior, subjects, or settings, or an alternating treatment design. A reversal withdrawal design, that ABAB, looks like this, where you can see in the first part, you have behavior occurring at a certain rate. That's the baseline. Then the intervention is applied, and you see that there is a behavior change. Behavior goes up, so this would be an intervention where you were trying to increase behavior. Then that intervention is taken away, and you can see that behavior returns to baseline levels. The intervention is reapplied and the behavior goes back up. So you're demonstrating that is in fact the intervention that is causing the behavior change and not something else in the environment. When the intervention is there, behavior change occurs. When it's not, behavior change goes away. However, you can't always use these designs if behavior is learned. So in that case, you might find it more effective to use a multiple baseline design, which looks something like this. You would be putting the same intervention. In this case, it's across students. So you can see here, and it's kind of hard to see that baseline is taken for the individuals, and Robert would be down here. And they all have about the same rates. Then the intervention is applied to the first individual, but baseline is still continued for the next two. You can see that even though there starts to be a change in behavior for the first individual here, and the graph doesn't show up very well, the behavior for Pete actually stays the same. And there's no behavior change for him until the intervention is actually applied to him. So we know that it is causing the intervention that's causing it. It's not something else in the environment, because we're not seeing a change in Pete's behavior until the intervention is actually applied to him. And finally, an alternating treatment design is where the treatment is alternated between two, and you see behaviors change based on which treatment is applied. Um, in order to determine that a single subject research methodology um, can be considered evidence-based, you need to see a minimum of 5 single subject studies that use those methodological criteria so that you can see that there is experimental control, and they're published in peer-reviewed journals. That's very important as well. So a minimum of 5 studies. Those studies have to be conducted by 3 different researchers across at least 3 different geographical locations. So if one researcher is publishing 5 studies in the same place, that won't actually allow his intervention to qualify as being evidence-based. And there must be at least 20 participants um, between all 5 studies. Single subject design develops its evidence base through replication. So that's why it's very important that these interventions are done and replicated over many people with different researchers. Experimental and quasi-experimental group methodology is where an intervention is applied to a large group of people, and individuals are assigned either to receive the intervention or to get in a control group where they don't receive the intervention. Whether they receive or don't receive the intervention should be random, so they should be randomly assigned to groups. You'll want to measure treatment implementation fidelity. So was the treatment given to all the members of the group in the way that it is supposed to be given? And then not only are you looking at the statistics, whether the statistics showed that it that the change that occurred was in fact statistically significant. You'll also want to look at the effect size. So not only was there a significant difference between the groups, did the intervention work, but was it effective? So that effect size looks at the strength of the treatment, and when you're reading the results, you'll look for the effect size, and you want to look for effect sizes of 0.5 or larger. In order for interventions being done using experimental or group or quasi-experimental methodology, there needs to be at least 4 acceptable quality studies or 2 very high quality studies. And the weighted effect size has to be significantly greater than 0.